Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Isiah. In today's podcast, we'll talk about two of the top teams in the league dropping games. We'll talk about an unexpected win for the Warriors just before getting Stephen Curry back. We'll check in on the Clippers, who have been on a roll recently. Luka Doncic had himself a night to remember, so we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about a tough loss for the Boston Celtics before ending the show on some predictions on some of the best games happening over the next few days. So, like I said, two of the best teams in the league dropped some games that, you typically wouldn't necessarily expect them to lose. And one of them being the Rockets. The Rockets came into this game on an absolute tear. They're on a 6-game winning streak. Small ball has really been working for them. They've beaten some great teams, including the Boston Celtics. They just beat them in a huge win in overtime. Russell Westbrook has been a man absolutely on fire. He's been averaging great numbers, over 30 points, almost 35 points like James Harden has been for most of the year. He's been very efficient with his shooting, been shooting over 50%. I think that's the first time in his career where he's had this many games in a row where he's shot over 50%. So he's been playing really great basketball in the small ball lineup, where it just sees him have so much more space on the floor to operate the way he wishes to operate on a night-in, night-out basis. And the Rockets were making some serious headways on the standings. They're in fourth right now. They just keep climbing. They're playing really well as of right now. Now, their next opponent that they end up losing to, obviously I already told you that, but they're up against the New York Knicks, who always seem to just be a mess. They're 13th right now in the Eastern Conference, haven't been that productive this season. But going back to the Rockets, like I've said from the very beginning, I've always had some doubts about small ball. And in this game, those doubts really come to fruition. They really come to the light, and you see why some people doubt small ball really working in the long run. The Knicks were up and ready for this game. The Rockets had a 9-1 lead early on, but then the Knicks kind of started getting into this gear. They jumped out to a 36-31 lead at the end of the first quarter. Barrett, at this point, had already had 14 points and 4 assists, so a great start for the rookie for the New York Knicks. James Harden led the way for the Rockets with 10 points, but 8 of those points being from the line, a trend that would kind of stay true throughout the game. The Knicks would continue to build on their lead, extending it to 21 at one point in the second. So this is a team where the Rockets have been playing so well, beating some of the best teams in the NBA, just beat the Boston Celtics in OT, and you're down 21 to the New York Knicks. It gets me starting to think that maybe they're underestimating a team, and this team is taking it to them. And in this quarter, Ellington was 4 for 5 from downtown for a total of 12 points to help build that 21-point lead. But then as the quarter went on, the Rockets made it a little more respectable for a 73-63 halftime score, with the Knicks still up. 73 points were given up by the Rockets in a half. I feel like that's just not very good defense, especially against a team like the Knicks, who probably don't have the best offense in the league. And so a lot of it probably has to do with just effort, and they just probably weren't ready for what the Knicks were doing to them. James Harden also was struggling. He had 16 points, 10 of them being from the line, shooting 3 for 10 and 0 for 6 from three-point land. So I think probably a lot of the fact that he was putting up shots, not making as many, is the reason why the Knicks went out to such a big lead. The Knicks shot the ball over 50% from the field and from three as well, whereas the Rockets struggled on the other end. They shot 40% from the field and 32% from three-point land. The Knicks ended up extending out their lead again to 83-65 before the Rockets finished the quarter really well, kept the lead at just 10 going into the fourth, where they would really start to make their push. The Rockets would continuously chip away at the lead and even get as close as 2 points away from tying, but every time they got close, the Knicks had a much-needed response. They always seemed to get a timely bucket. With a little over 30 seconds to go, the Rockets were down 1 with the ball in James Harden's hand. Not really someone else you would want with the ball in your hand, which is perfect. He's the guy. He's the guy, and you expect him to take this game to overtime. He drove into the lane to his left. He kind of slipped between two players for a layup, but he missed it. James Harden missed the layup. And now going the other way, RJ Barrett has the ball 1v1 against PJ Tucker. He drives to his left, kind of bumps off Tucker with his shoulder, and Tucker falls to the floor kind of looking for an offensive foul. And Barrett just fades away, banks it off the glass to make it 124-121 with 8 seconds to go. Westbrook would then make 2 free throws, and Randall would make one on the other side, setting up Westbrook with 4.6 to play, down 2. And this is probably the person you really want the ball in their hands because of how efficient he's been, because of how consistent he's been over the last few games, just playing extremely well. Down 2, he pulled up from mid-range, just a little bit behind the free throw line, and it would bounce a few times around the rim before falling off. The Knicks would win this game 125-123. The Rockets' 6-game win streak snapped. And to the New York Knicks, so why did this happen? A big reason why, the Knicks out-rebounded them 65-34. And similarly, they had 64 points in the paint compared to the Rockets having 36. So it goes back to the whole small ball lineup. The Knicks knew their strength was inside play and that the Rockets game obviously was on the outside. So if they could try and limit their ability to make three-pointers like they did in the first half, shot under 30%, and they gave it to them on the inside, they would have a chance. And that's exactly what the numbers tell you happened in this one. The Knicks ended a 9-home game losing streak to the Rockets. Their last win was January 26, 2009, when Mike D'Antoni was their head coach. James Harden in this one had 35 points, 2 rebounds, 8 assists with 4 steals, but 16 of those 35 points was from the free throw line. So he did not shoot the ball very well from the field. He struggled mightily when it came to that. Russell Westbrook, he continued his hot streak. He had 24 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, and this is his 31st straight game that Westbrook had 20 or more points in a game. Robert Covington had a great game, 20 points, 13 rebounds with 2 steals and a block for a really nice double-double. Daniel House Jr. had 20. And then on the other side of the ball, RJ Barrett led the way for the Knicks, had 27 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. A great game for the rookie. Clutch game as well to lead all scorers, but also get that clutch bucket down the stretch that really put the game away. Randall had a nice double-double with 16 points, 16 rebounds. Portis had 15 points, 5 rebounds, a steal, and a block, and 2 blocks, And then Ellington added 15 points. He made those 4 threes in the second quarter, but then he added one later on that gave him the 15 points. And so overall, this was just a great team win for the Knicks. A very surprising loss from the Rockets, who, like I said before, just beat the Celtics. So kind of a step back when they had made such great headway playing in this small ball way. Even more surprising, though, the Milwaukee Bucks lost. I mean, I asked the question a few podcasts ago, who is going to beat this team that's only lost 8 times up until now? Well, the answer is the Miami Heat, who are very well equipped to go deep into the playoffs and have already beaten the Bucks once this year. And so now, beating them again, they're the first team to beat the Bucks twice this season. It's a really good sign. 2-0 against one of the best teams in the NBA, the best team in the NBA. And so they know that if they get into a matchup with them in the playoffs, they could potentially beat them. With 19 games left on the schedule, the Heat have already matched their win total from last season at 39. So they've made a lot of strides from last season in this game. Heat won this game 105-89. Wait. The Bucks scored only 89 points? That's their season low. Before it was 93 after they had just played the Hornets, So their last 2 games, they've scored under 100 points. What's happening to the Milwaukee Bucks? What's going on here? The big issue was that the Miami was, first of all, 18 of 37 on threes, whereas the Bucks were 7 for 34. So they could not hit from downtown. That's a big part of their offense. The Heat also are a very physical team that are very active defensively, so they just make it tough on their opposition. And lastly, Giannis matched a season low 13 points. He was 6 for 18, but did grab 15 boards, but 13 points from Giannis, that's unheard of. It's just something you don't see. If you watched the first half and stopped watching the rest of the game, you'd probably be surprised by this lopsided ending. The Heat were only up by 1 point at the end of the first half. But then the Heat pushed it out to an 11-point lead to start the fourth, and they actually held on to a lead as compared to in previous games, like we've talked about before in previous podcasts, that they blow big leads. It's teams like the Cavaliers, the Hawks, and even the Timberwolves. So in this game, against the best team in the NBA, they pushed out to a big lead, and they held on to it as well. For the Bucks, Middleton had returned in this one after being out for 2 games with a sore neck, and even though he started out hot with 10 points in 6 minutes in the first, he ended up with just 12 the whole game. He did add 7 rebounds, but 12 points when your other big star is struggling is not a good look. Brook Lopez was actually the one that led the team with 21 points and 6 rebounds. George Hill had 12 points. DiVincenzo had 11 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. So really just no outstanding scorers for the Milwaukee Bucks, who have one of the best offenses in the league. And kind of similarly on the other side of the ball, there weren't any outstanding scorers for Miami either, but the difference was it was a huge team effort. Jimmy Butler had 18 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists. Crowder had 18 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. Dragic had 15 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. And then Bam Adebayo had a nice double-double with 14 points, 13 rebounds, 5 assists with 3 blocks. So he did it all, played a great game. Was a big reason why Giannis was limited as much as he was. And so it was a huge win for the Heat. And I'm not to say that the Heat can't beat the Bucks, but either way, it's just still surprising when it happens because this Bucks team has now only lost 9 games. Another shocking loss that came at the hands of the worst team in the league, but maybe they won't be the worst team in the league for much longer, happened just a few games ago. So find out who and find out why coming up next.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about 2 big teams in the NBA dropping some games that you don't necessarily think you would have seen. The Houston Rockets losing to the New York Knicks. James Harden struggling from the field, did end up with a good amount of points, over 30 points. But the New York Knicks just bullied them down low, out-rebounded them by over 20, had inside scoring more than the Rockets, and just beat them. Late in the game, RJ Barrett had a clutch bucket to put the game away. And then we also talked about how the Milwaukee Bucks lost just their 9th game. And this game they dropped to the Miami Heat, who have beat them twice. The only team to have done so this year, have beat them twice this year. So it's a very impressive win for Miami. A good sign for them. If they reach the Eastern Conference Finals, they go up against the Bucks. They know they can go toe-to-toe with them because they match up well. Big reason why this game went Miami's way, though, is because Giannis was limited to just 13 points in this one. Not something you'll see more than once. Now, moving forward, another big upset in this week was the Warriors beating the Nuggets. I don't even have to say that the Warriors are not what they once were. They're 14-48 this season after being in the last 5 NBA Finals. Reason being, Stephen Curry has been out pretty much all year long. He only played 4 games this year before breaking his hand. Klay Thompson in the finals last year tore his ACL. He's been out the entire year. He won't even play this year. KD obviously left to the Brooklyn Nets. And then Draymond Green, Draymond hasn't really wanted to play this season. He's taken time off for injuries that really, I don't think really are injuries. And just taking time to himself really because this season is pretty much a lost cause anyway. So it doesn't really matter if he takes a few games off. But he has been nursing some injuries here and there. Now this Golden State Warriors team was going up against the Nuggets, the second best team in the West at the time, who had just beat the defending champs in the Raptors. So they're a great team, playing some great basketball right now. The Warriors would be without Draymond and no Kevon Looney in this game. And so their team would be made up of first-year players with the organization, 10-day contract guys, and just a pretty much broken roster. So you kind of would think this game wouldn't go well for the Golden State Warriors. The first quarter, the Warriors started out pretty hot, jumped out to an 8-0 lead to start the game, and ended up with a 26-25 lead after the first quarter. Then in the second, the Nuggets would get their first lead early on, and they would not look back from there. 12 points from Jamal Murray would help the Nuggets outscore the Warriors 33-23 in the second to take a 58-49 lead at halftime. The Warriors are known to play pretty well for the majority of the first half of the game. They're very competitive, very scrappy, but they seem to always fall off because they don't have that experience, that extra gear to go into to close out games because they've been lacking their stars. So you see a lead of 58-49 for the Denver Nuggets, a team that's second in the West, has just beat the Toronto Raptors. You think they're going to coast and win this game. The Nuggets would continue to add on to their lead, their biggest being 15 at one point. But with the score at 77-65 for the Nuggets, the Warriors would go on a crazy run that would extend into the fourth. They started picking away at the lead the Nuggets had, and eventually they took it back on a buzzer-beating 3 from rookie Jordan Poole. He had just tied it on a deep, banked-in 3 before going down 2, and then he hit a nice step-back 3 in Plumlee's face to take the lead and the momentum into the fourth quarter. This game would stay close and competitive for the first 7 minutes of the fourth, but little by little, the Warriors were the ones to pull away and take this one 116-100. They outscored the Nuggets 67-42 in the second half. I don't know what happened here, what Steve Kerr said to them in the halftime locker room, but it was insane, inspired. Or really, was it the Nuggets taking their foot off the gas, thinking this is the worst team in the West? We're already beating them by 9 points at half. We're going up 15. We're going to win this game. But no, the resilience of the Warriors was shown here. And the Nuggets, who have a great home record, dropped one at home. They're 24-8 at home, and they lost to the worst team in the West. They've also lost to teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they also lost to the Atlanta Hawks at one point this season. All bottom-tier teams. The Cavs and the Hawks have both been last in the East, back and forth all season long. And now they lost to the Warriors too. So I'm not sure what's going on with the Nuggets right now, but it's not where they want to be in this last bit of run heading into the playoffs. So not only that, they're also 3-3 since the All-Star break. So since that, not quote-unquote midpoint of the season for the Denver Nuggets, they've been kind of inconsistent. And, you know, that can be purely shown by just how they beat the Raptors and then lose to the Warriors. So they need to find that consistency, find that competitiveness again to that what got them to second place in the West. Barton in this one had 18 points, 5 rebounds. That was your highest scorer. Millsap tied him with 18 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists. Jokic, your biggest star, scored 16 points, had 13 boards for a double-double with 7 assists, a steal, and 2 blocks. So he did, pad the stat sheet just a little bit, but the scoring output in this one from the Denver Nuggets was poor. Plumlee had 16 points, 9 rebounds. Jamal Murray, one of the people that should be leading all scorers, had 14 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. And then Harris had 8, and Jeremy Grant had 3. So these are players that typically have much better showings offensively, and unfortunately, they didn't play well in this one. And fortunately for the Warriors, they did play well, especially Andrew Wiggins, who had 22 points, 5 rebounds, and 10 assists for a nice double-double. Eric Paschall had 22 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. And let me remind you, this guy is just a rookie. I think Eric Paschall is going to be one of the better players in the NBA in the next couple seasons. He's just an animal, and he has such a great mid-range game to add on to this Warriors team that could be pretty good in the next couple years. Marquise Chris, another great piece that's been playing really well for the Warriors, 16 points, 5 boards. Michael Mulder, who's on a 10-day contract, scored 15 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. That's more than Jamal Murray. He's on a 10-day contract. Jordan Poole, another rookie, playing pretty well as of late, 15 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists. And then Bender, who's ending a 10-day contract, had 14 points and 5 rebounds. So a pretty good performance from a broken roster in the Golden State Warriors. Obviously, it's not a great year for them, so you got to take little victories as they come, like this one. But the other victory they can take away from this is that Stephen Curry, after this game, is officially back. He wanted to play against the Wizards on Sunday. That was his date to come back. Steve Kerr kind of pumped the brakes, saying, whoa, I don't know. You need some more 5-on-5 practice. We wanted to make sure you're fully fit, make sure you're fully able to take contact. And so he kind of pumped the brakes a little bit and sent him to the G League, which I thought was so funny because I can't even think of any more established player to have ever been playing with the G League affiliate other than Stephen Curry. Maybe DeMarcus Cousins when he was doing his rehab with the Warriors last year, but Stephen Curry is definitely the most decorated and one of the best players in the world. So having him go down the G League was pretty funny. And then they would put out a press release saying the Warriors are calling up Stephen Curry from the G League, and Twitter had a field day with it, making sarcastic comments saying, I don't know how this kid will turn out. Isn't that the kid from Davidson? Just making jokes about it. I thought it was pretty funny to see. But now he's cleared to play against the Toronto Raptors, the defending champions, and this is a really cool little finals rematch. And because Stephen Curry's in it, it's going to have a lot more weight to it. I'll give you my prediction on that game later. The problem being that Curry says that he still has nerve damage, and even though he doesn't think it'll affect him day-to-day playing basketball, I still have doubts in my mind about it being exactly the same for the two-time MVP. If you have nerve damage, I feel like he said he has to learn a new normal. So how much of that is really going to be a transition period for him? How much is it really going to impact his ability to perform? He said, quote, "It feels good. It's been a long 3.5+ months, whatever it is, just trying to understand all the different checkpoints I had to try and get through to get to this point, and then what's left. But this is the fun part, I guess, where you actually play basketball and worry about what happens in between the lines and not so much the specific rehab parts. It's nice to get out there with my guys and play and keep moving forward." And so Curry is pretty adamant, obviously, on playing, so he must feel pretty good at this point. And so I have to assume that even if he has a little bit of nerve damage, he feels well enough to be able to compete at the highest level. And it's going to be interesting for him because a lot of his teammates right now, he hasn't played with more than just 4 games. Kai Bowman, Eric Paschall, Jordan Poole, Marquise Chris. He hasn't even played with Chasson Randle, who just signed with the team after leaving his Chinese league team because they shut down because of the whole coronavirus. Michael Mulder, who just became on a 10-day contract. Alan Smailagic, he hasn't played with him either. So there's a lot of players on this roster that Curry's not familiar with. So it's going to be interesting to see how these players gel together relatively quickly. The only players he's played with consistently that are available are Draymond Green, Kevon Looney, and Damian Lee. And Damian Lee is the only player of those 3 that will probably play in this game. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Warriors adapt, how Curry's going to adapt in his first game. And we'll talk a little bit more about it later when I give a prediction. But the real story of this game that I broke down was that the Nuggets lost it. A game where they probably should have won, and it does kind of mean something because the Clippers have now eclipsed them for the number 2 spot in the Western Conference. The Clippers have been on a roll recently, so we take a look at their last few games coming up next.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how the Golden State Warriors, the worst team in the league, the worst team in the Western Conference, beat the Denver Nuggets, who had just been the Toronto Raptors, defending champions, and were in second place in the West at the time. And so dropping a game like this is really shocking to see, especially since the Warriors lineup right now is broken up. It's a bunch of 10-day contract players. It's a bunch of rookies, and it's a bunch of players that really don't spend that much time being competitive usually when they have their full squad with Stephen Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, and so on and so forth. So it's a very great win for the Golden State Warriors, but a really disappointing loss for the Denver Nuggets, who were in second at the time, but now they're not. They're in third, and the Los Angeles Clippers are the team that have taken over number 2. I said it a few podcasts ago. The Clippers were going to make a turn, gain momentum, and really start to make their run towards the playoffs. And that's exactly what they're doing right now. I said it right before they went on this win streak because I found out that they were fully healthy, and so it hadn't happened a lot during the season up to that point. And so now that it finally happened, now they've had a few games in a row fully healthy and had everyone available, they've been on a 5-game winning streak. During that time, they've been the Memphis Grizzlies, a team who is fighting for that 8th place spot. They still have it right now, but they're fighting off 4 other teams that are trying to beat them right now. That Grizzlies team doesn't have Jaren Jackson Jr., but they're still resilient, still super tough. And so that's a huge win right there. Phoenix Suns, that's typical. I expect the Clippers to win that game. They beat the Denver Nuggets, who, like I just said, were right in front of them at the time. And so that's a big win to try and make some ground. They beat the 76ers, who had Shake Milton go off for a career high out of nowhere and just lead the Sixers in a game where they don't have Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid to make it a pretty competitive game, and the Clippers held them off. And last but not least, they beat the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are a fantastic team in the Western Conference. We'll break down that game in just a little bit. But the big reason why is because this Clippers team has finally become healthy, and their full squad, their whole team is scary. They are so deep. I mean, your top 2 stars are Kawhi Leonard, the finals MVP of last finals, Paul George, who obviously is an established 2-way guard in this league. You got Montrezl Harrell and Lou Williams coming off the bench. That's how good your squad is. You got Patrick Beverley, who isn't obviously something of a great player, but he is just such a great workhorse for that team, and they're just such a great defensive team as well. And then you got Marcus Morris, you got Reggie Jackson, and just so many other things that make this team great. And they're an all-defensive team, and when they have all offensive qualities as well, it's dangerous. Their most recent win could mean a lot for many different scenarios that we'll kind of break into. They're up against the Oklahoma City Thunder. So there was a warm reception for PG, who obviously had a a brief stint with the Oklahoma City Thunder, just 2 or 3 seasons. Teamed up with Russell Westbrook. They didn't get too far in the playoffs every time he was there, but he was saying how even in his brief time, he was accepted real quickly. He felt like he was at home. Felt like because of that, he always wants to have them as a piece of his home, and he wants to do more charity work there, so on and so forth. So the love between the two is mutual, and it was nice for him to get a nice warm ovation. Unfortunately for him, it wasn't the same for other players on his team. Reggie Jackson, a former Oklahoma City Thunder player, got rained with boos when he was introduced, and then also Patrick Beverley as well got boos because back when he was on the Houston Rockets and he was up against the Thunder in the playoffs in 2013, he ran into Russell Westbrook, which eventually resulted in a knee injury that ended his season. So Oklahoma City Thunder fans, do not forget, they fully hold grudges, and Patrick Beverley heard it. I'm sure he hears it from a lot of the league, though, because he's not a very popular guy. The Thunder had just lost a pretty big game to the Milwaukee Bucks. They got absolutely destroyed 133-86. So obviously coming off a game like that, it's kind of demoralizing, and you don't really know what to do and how to pick yourself up at that point. They just got to try and dust themselves off and get back into it. But it looked like it was going to be ugly early on. The Clippers took a 38-27 lead just after the first quarter. The Thunder ended up fighting back in the second, getting within 1 with 5.5 to go, at which point the Clippers would then turn on the offense to expand the lead out to 15 again. The Clippers would have a 59-47 lead going into the half, and so it's not looking good for the Thunder up until this point. Things would only get worse before they got better. The Clippers getting their lead out to 21 at one point for a dominant third quarter. And then they coasted in the fourth. The Thunder not even getting close to a comeback effort at all in this one. The Clippers were comfortably holding on to the lead, and they took this one 109-94. This is only the second time this season that the Thunder have failed to score 100 points in back-to-back games. The first time being the first 2 games of the season. So as much as they've improved throughout the season, they kind of took a couple steps back against 2 of the most elite teams in the NBA. So it's a good measuring stick to see where the Oklahoma City Thunder are, but it's also a reality check as well, saying, they've been playing pretty well, but they're not there yet. They have a lot to work on. So playing 2 great teams like that can do that. Hopefully they can get back to the drawing board and get back to winning ways. The stats were pretty much all equal in this one, honestly, but the difference was that the Clippers just made more buckets and more timely one as well. So they got good stops and played good defense, and I think that was probably the difference as well. Dennis Schroeder in this one had 24 points to lead the Thunder. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had 15 points, 6 rebounds with 3 blocks. Danilo Gallinari had 15 points, 4 rebounds, and then Chris Paul had 14 points and 7 assists. So that's it for double-digit scores, and your highest one being 24 coming off the bench. Your next one being 15. Just not enough high-volume scoring, and it's just credit to the Los Angeles Clippers defense. They're just that good. Kawhi Leonard had 25 points, 8 rebounds with 2 steals. Paul George had 16 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists with 2 steals. Montrezl Harrell had 16 points of his own, and then Lou Williams had 14 points. So a big win for the Clippers. With seeing the Nuggets lose, they took second place. They're 5.5 back from the Lakers now, and the Nuggets are just 1 game behind them. So they're in a really good position right now to kind of push their way towards the top of the Western Conference, kind of put some more pressure on the Los Angeles Lakers. Even though they're only 5.5 games back right now, doesn't mean they can't still make some headway. And really make the Lakers sweat about holding on to their number 1 spot that they've had pretty much all season long. With the Nuggets having their latest bad run of form, they have to be careful that they don't slip farther, because once you end up slipping farther, you just have to play tougher competition, and that's something that they definitely don't want to have to do. And behind them right now are the Houston Rockets, who are 1.5 away, and typically have been playing really well other than losing this last game against the New York Knicks. So typically you're going to have to expect they're going to be right behind you and going to be pushing you to win games. And because of the fact that they're 3-3 since the All-Star break, it raises the question of whether or not they're going to be consistent enough down the stretch to hold on to a high seeding in the Western Conference. The Thunder as well, this loss had them go to a 2-game losing streak. They did right the ship against Detroit Wednesday night, but they're in a delicate position too. They can even really make a push past the Utah Jazz, maybe the Houston Rockets if they're consistent enough. They're not that far behind. They're only a game and a half behind the Jazz, 2 games back from the Rockets, so they definitely have the makings to get higher up into this conference, but it's tough to do for sure when the Rockets are already playing so well. But I think maybe they could eclipse the Jazz because they haven't been playing that well. The Mavericks as well, they don't want to have to fall behind them because the Mavericks have become just half a game behind the Oklahoma City Thunder. And so if the Lakers and the Clippers end up 1-2 in the West, the Thunder, as of right now, sitting in 6th place, would have to play the Denver Nuggets, who are in 3rd, which is best case scenario. So if you have to hold on to the spot or you have to keep climbing up the standings, because if they fall down to 7th place, they'll be matched up against either the Lakers or the Clippers at 1 or 2. So that's a much tougher matchup than the Denver Nuggets. So that's most ideal for them. That's what they got to be looking forward to doing and holding on to their best bet, their best place in this Western Conference. We spent a lot of time talking about that last playoff spot for the Memphis Grizzlies being up for grabs, but 2 through 7 in this Western Conference race is up for grabs. Honestly, people and teams can shift all over. Speaking of shifting all over, the Mavericks have fallen pretty far down the Western Conference standings, but that doesn't mean they can't climb back up. They took a step in the right direction in their game against the Grizzlies, and Luka had a historic night to add the cherry on top. Stay with us.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Isiah Quiroz. We just talked about the Los Angeles Clippers and their run of form as of late. They're on a 5-game winning streak. They have climbed all the way up back to the 2nd place in the Western Conference, and they're 5.5 back from Los Angeles Lakers. So they could potentially make a move to try and make the Lakers sweat a little bit about their first place spot. And it could be a big moment for the Clippers, too, if they do that. Because now, finally being healthy, they're showing what they can truly do. This is one of their best win streaks of the season. And so now we look forward to the Dallas Mavericks, who just had a pretty big game. They're in 7th place right now. 6 would be ideal, like we talked about last podcast. So they're in 6th place, and the rest of the standings end up as they are as of now. They would be up against the Denver Nuggets, which, in my opinion, would be the easiest matchup for any team, really, in this Western Conference standings. Not to give any disrespect to the Denver Nuggets or what they've done all season. They're 41-20. They're a great team. But when you look at the Los Angeles Lakers, the Clippers, even the Rockets, those teams just seem a little bit more intimidating. So the Mavericks want to get higher up in the standings so that they can potentially dodge playing the Lakers or the Clippers. And so they're only half game back from doing this, to eclipsing the Oklahoma City Thunder in the standings. And so just a few days after Luka's 21st birthday, he would be going up against Zion Williamson for the first time and the Pelicans. The Pelicans at this point are on a 2-game skid, and Zion was playing his first ever back-to-back. So this was a big deal because obviously when he first came back, they were totally babying him and having him on a minutes restriction, not making him play back-to-backs. And now he's finally gotten that level where he feels pretty comfortable. He's been in pretty good shape. And so this is his first game back-to-back. It's a good test for him to see where he's at physically. The Pelicans would also be without J.J. Redick. He'll probably be out for a couple weeks with an injury, which is really unfortunate for them as they're trying to make this push to get into that last playoff spot. So unfortunate for them. But in this game, it was so close and so back and forth. There were 13 lead changes in this one and 18 times where the game was tied. The Mavericks would be the ones ahead at the end of the first quarter, 24-22. They then had their lead extended out to 11 before the Pelicans brought it close again and again, and the Mavericks would have the halftime lead up by just 2 points. At halftime, the Mavericks had 11 blocks. So welcome to the block party. 3 of them being against Zion. So crazy stat for the Dallas Mavericks. But nothing would still separate these two teams in the third. Each team scoring 30 points each, meaning the Mavericks would still have a 2-point lead. The fourth quarter was much of the same. Very competitive, very back and forth. And for the majority of the fourth, the Mavericks would have the lead. And any time that the Pelicans would come close or even tie it, as they did a few times in this one, they would just push it back out. But with 2.5 to go, Ingram hit a big 3 to take the lead finally for the Pelicans, 107-106. He would then extend it out with a tough fadeaway, so Pelicans would go up by 3. Then with the Mavericks down by 1, with 36 seconds to go, it was Curry, not Stephen Curry, his brother Seth Curry, who would regain the lead on a huge 3 in the corner. And so now the Pelicans down 112-109 and 7 seconds left. Nikola Melli, who had missed his last 6 3-pointers, got the inbounds pass, put it up, and knocked it down to tie the game and send it into overtime with Porzingis missing a fadeaway game winner. So what kind of confidence do you have to have when you've missed 6 3-pointers in a row, but they didn't draw up the play for Melli to take this 3? There's no way. He was just an open guy. They gave it to him, and he shot it with confidence, which is something you should give him a pat on the back for, because if I've missed 6 threes in a row, I'm not taking another one for the rest of the game. I wouldn't have even missed 6 in a row because I wouldn't have taken that many. But kudos to him for, locking in and putting it down. So great clutch bucket there for the Pelicans to try and take this one in OT. With the game tied at 118 in overtime with 1:11 to go, it's Luka Doncic who hits a step-back 3, super clutch to take the lead late in the game, and later he would then split 2 defenders with a pass and find Porzingis, who goes and spikes it down, extending their lead to 123-119, effectively icing this game. The Mavericks would win this game 127-123, and this game could honestly not have been any tighter. It was close the entire game. Both teams kind of pushing out for some leads, but then again, at the end of each quarter, they would just come back to 2-point deficits and then tied, obviously, to go to overtime. So an crazy game where it's just super back and forth, very competitive, and it was just a great game to watch. The Mavericks coming into this game were just 5-15 in games decided by 5 points or less. So they're not necessarily clutch. When it comes down to the wire, they seem to always drop games. But for whatever reason in this one, they came out on top and were able to hold on. And for a big reason why are their 2 budding stars in Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis. Luka Doncic in particular had a historical night, like I said. And the reason being is he scored 30 points, had 17 rebounds, and 10 assists. Another triple-double. This triple-double, though, is huge because it broke Jason Kidd's record for the most career triple-doubles in Mavericks franchise history. He just broke the career triple-doubles record in franchise history. Do you know how old he is? He's 21 years old, and he already beat it. That's just honestly mind-blowing because he's so young, has so much obviously left in the tank because this is only his second year in the league. and he's already breaking accolades like this. I can only imagine where his ceiling is going to be. He has so much potential because there's no way this is his peak. So for this to be a starting point for him, I can't wait to see just how much better he gets over time. That pass to Porzingis to ice the game that I talked about early on in overtime was his 10th assist for history. Super clutch. He did it all with a nagging thumb injury as well. We've talked about it in previous podcasts. He sat out a couple games because of it. And after this game, he got x-rays on it. So he kind of just shrugs it off. He says, I'm always going to get hit in that thumb. It's obviously uncomfortable, but I just got to keep grinding it out. And he scored a triple-double with a thumb injury. It's insane to me. Porzingis is going to get overlooked in this game just because Luka Doncic made history. But Porzingis should get a lot of headlines as well. He played a fantastic game. Had 34 points with 12 rebounds and 5 blocks. He was an absolute monster. So great game for him as well. Kind of overshadowed by Luka just being Luka, being magic. And then Seth Curry had 21 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists. Another player been not underwhelming. He's been underappreciated, I think, in a lot of ways, because he's been going off lately and he does not get enough attention. Tim Hardaway Jr., 18 points. DeLon Wright, 10 points, 5 assists. And now, so the poor Pelicans are on a 3-game losing streak at a very tough time. It sees them drop a bunch of places. They're 5 back now from the Memphis Grizzlies for that last playoff spot. They're also behind the Portland Trail Blazers, the Sacramento Kings, and the San Antonio Spurs. So not only are they out from that playoff spot right now, they also have a couple more roadblocks in front of them to try and get back in this. And because they're 5 games back, it's not looking good for them either. Only the 1995-1996 Washington Bullets have made the playoffs after being 5 games out of the race with 20 games to play. So history is not on their side. But then again, they do have a generational talent in Zion Williamson, and their players are playing pretty well right now for them to be able to go out and make history. Who knows? It happens every day. People asking also if Zion's conditioning was okay. I mean, it took him a minute to get going in his first game back. He was pretty sluggish in his first back-to-back, And Alvin Gentry totally shut this down. He said, you know what? We worry about him too much. He's 19 years old. He's going to be fine. Kind of a grumpy response, but I get what he's saying. Honestly, though, he was pretty sluggish in the first half. Also, he was just getting played really tough, really physical by this Dallas Mavericks team. The combination of Maxi Kleber and Porzingis starting in the lineup to try and limit Zion worked to an extent. Obviously, you can't really defend Zion by yourself. You need help, even though the kid's only 19 years old, which also is scary because he's a matchup problem already. But he's still pretty good in this game. He had 21 points, 6 rebounds, so he was effective to an extent, just not as explosive, as prolific as he's been in games past. Brandon Ingram, though, had 27 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. The big player for me in this one for the Pelicans was Lonzo Ball. 25 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, with 2 steals and a block. Went 7 for 11 from three-point land. That's a big improvement for Lonzo Ball, who struggled with his shot coming into the league. And so, big steps for him. Hopefully he can keep that up. Drew Holiday had 19 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists. And so the Pelicans, they're in a tough situation, honestly. If they're going to try and make it to the playoffs, it's going to be tough. The Mavericks, they're looking to get higher themselves, and they're taking steps in the right direction. They're healthy right now. Obviously, Luka's got that thumb issue, but he seems pretty good with playing through it, obviously. And another big game that went to overtime was the Boston Celtics versus the Brooklyn Nets. We break that game down coming up next.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about the Dallas Mavericks taking on the New Orleans Pelicans. Luka versus Zion for the very first time since Zion missed the first 3 matchups against the Mavericks. And so the Mavericks take this game to the overtime. It was a close game throughout the entirety of the game, only being separated by 2 points for the majority of it at the end of each quarter. Going to overtime, and it's Luka Doncic who's in the clutch, has a step-back 3 and an assist to ice the game, gets his another triple-double to break Jason Kidd's record for most career triple-doubles in Mavericks franchise history at just 21 years of age. Not only that, Porzingis had a monster performance with 34 points, 12 rebounds, 5 blocks. So the two of them as a tandem is going to be scary for years to come because they're both very young, both already playing at an elite level. So it's going to be interesting to see how this Mavericks team really looks in just a couple years. Moving forward now, though, another game that went to overtime that was a really big one was the Boston Celtics versus the Brooklyn Nets. The Nets were on a 4-game losing streak at this point and are 8th in the standings as this game is about to be played. Kemba Walker for the Boston Celtics would be returning to the team, who are 3rd in the East. They're pushing for 2nd. Getting 2nd would honestly be huge because in the Eastern Conference, like we've talked about in previous podcasts, it's broken up into sections. It's obviously the Bucks all alone. It's the Raptors and the Celtics who are pretty close, only a game apart. Then it's the Heat, Pacers, and Sixers who are pretty close for a minute, but the Heat kind of gained some ground a little bit. They're kind of getting back to the top 3. And then it's the Brooklyn Nets and the Orlando Magic who are kind of just sitting in 7 and 8, both under 500, not really too much of a threat if you take them to a 7-game series. So if the Boston Celtics can get into that second-place spot, they're not going to get first. The Bucks are going to lock that up, no doubt. But if you can get second place, you play either Brooklyn Nets or Orlando Magic, depending on where they end up. So I think that would be a much better matchup for the Boston Celtics rather than trying to go up against the 76ers team that might be getting back Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, who have been just injured. But at the same time, they're resting in a way. So not necessarily getting momentum, but getting some rest could be beneficial for them. And the Celtics against the Sixers will be much tougher than having to just play the Nets or the Magic. So that's definitely where they want to be. The problem is that they're playing without Jason Tatum, who was sick. But nevertheless, Boston Celtics are at home. So you would think they would take this game. The game would start off, and in the first half, the Celtics would have the lead 56-43, but at this point, they would have to continue without Gordon Hayward, who went out with a bruised knee. He would later say in an interview saying that he doesn't think it's serious, but he didn't play in their ensuing game, so they got to keep an eye on him. Hopefully it's nothing too serious, though. Boston Celtics would extend their lead out in the third at one point, being up by 21 points. Then things started getting crazy in the fourth quarter. Celtics up 21 at one point, up 17 to start the fourth quarter. Things get crazy. Can you guess what happens? Little by little, the momentum changed and the deficit shrunk. The Nets were trying to pull off a seemingly impossible comeback. I mean, no way. Boston with a 13-point lead with 4 to go. Another indicator. This game's a lockup. But the Nets just kept pushing. They would get within 3 with 2 minutes to play, just like that. and still down 3 with a minute to play when Jaylen Brown hit a corner 3 to extend the lead for the Boston Celtics to 6 with less than a minute to play. With 7 seconds left and down 5, you would think a team like the Boston Celtics in third place in the East, one of the best teams in the NBA, would hold on to a lead. 7 seconds. 5. You're up 5. DeAndre Jordan threw down a lob to bring them within 3. The Celtics would have trouble inbounding the ball, and it would result in a jump ball that the Nets would end up winning. They called timeout really quick. They're now down 3 with 1.4 on the clock. They're down 3, 1.4. Just don't let them shoot the 3 comfortably. They get the ball in to Caris LeVert, and he is mobbed by 2, maybe 3 players from the Boston Celtics, and LeVert draws a foul shooting a 3. How do you make this mistake if you're Boston? How? I mean, you have to be smarter than this. He's not in a great position to really shoot the 3. And you definitely don't want to foul and give him 3 easy free throws. He made all 3. He was super calm about it. The game would go to overtime. The Brooklyn Nets, the reason why this got crazy in the fourth quarter, they scored 51 points in the fourth quarter alone. That's a franchise record. Previous one being 48 from 1980. But who in their right mind scores 51 points in just one quarter alone? That's insane. LeVert in the fourth quarter had 26 of those 51 points. He was a man on fire. Hit 4 threes, was 7 for 10 and 8 from 11 from the line. So he just could not miss. He was just playing that well. In overtime, that would carry on. It was the Celtics versus LeVert. The Celtics would only make 1 field goal the entirety of overtime, resulting in 2 measly points. Caris LeVert in overtime scored all of the points for the Nets, had 11 to put the team on his back, outscored the Boston Celtics by himself, 11-2. Boston loses its 3rd consecutive overtime game at home to the Brooklyn Nets. Caris LeVert scores a career-high 51 points. He went off. 37 of those points being in the fourth quarter and overtime combined. Talk about clutch. 37 of your 51 points being in just the fourth quarter and overtime alone, it's unheard of. He ended with 51 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. I'm going to say this wrong, but Cabarrot had 16 points, 8 rebounds. Spencer Dinwiddie had 14 points, and Joe Harris had 10 points. DeAndre Jordan had 8 points and 15 boards. So your top scorer had 51 points, the next being 16, 14, 10, 8. That just shows how much LeVert really carried them in this game. And this is a player that was injured for a good portion of the beginning of the season due to a thumb injury, I believe it was. And this was a season where you really expected him to come out and be big because he was playing some great basketball before he got injured last season, had a gruesome leg injury, came back this season, hasn't really made too much noise. But now, this could be the start of Caris LeVert, really the coming out party for him, and him just dominating the way he probably can. He's a great offensive threat, and he showed it in this game. Boston, on the other end, they kind of struggled. Jaylen Brown had 22 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists with 2 steals. Kemba Walker, in his first game back in 5, had 21 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. Thies had 16 points, and then Marcus Smart, who fouled out in overtime, scored 14 points, had 6 boards with 10 assists with 2 steals and 2 blocks. So you always know you're going to get all of it from Marcus Smart. Fortunately for him, he couldn't compete in the entirety of overtime, which he was not happy about. He was arguing with the officials before he was shown out. But it was just a poor finish from Boston. I mean, you're up 21 at one point. You're up 17 at the beginning of the fourth. You give up 51 points in the fourth quarter. You foul on the game-tying 3. I mean, you just don't even give yourself a chance at that point. I mean, in a team that's looking to go deep into the playoffs, you got to be able to grind out games, got to be able to close out games, and that was a poor attempt at doing so. Fast forward through the week, and the Nets have moved up into 7th place, which is good for them. But I still like to think that them and Orlando will kind of just keep switching and swapping places until just the season ends and where they end up. They're only separated by just half a game right now, so I feel like they'll keep leapfrogging each other. The Celtics end up getting back to winning ways, but Gordon Hayward has that knee issue that we talked about. He's day-to-day right now. And now Jaylen Brown, he has a hamstring issue too. And if it's like any other hamstring issue that you usually see within the league, he'll be out for a week at the very least, maybe more. So I honestly think that you can expect him to be out for probably 2 weeks or so. And so that's not good if you're the Boston Celtics. You haven't had Kemba Walker for a long spell because he's been in and out with injuries. Gordon Hayward's day-to-day, so you don't really know how serious his injury is. And this is the moment where they need to start catching momentum. And for them to have lost this game in dramatic fashion and now losing some of their better players, it's tough. They're up 2.5 games from Miami, who are right behind them. 1 point behind Toronto, where I would imagine they want to be based on matchups for the playoffs. So they're going to have to make that push without Jaylen Brown, who's been a pretty big catalyst for them on the offensive end for the majority of the season. Obviously, he's not their consistent scorer. Jason Tatum holds that role, but he's a much-needed help in terms of scoring output. So I imagine that Marcus Smart will plug into that role and be just as helpful, but it just won't be the same. And not having Marcus Smart come off the bench would kind of hinder their ability to be successful as well in that second unit. But nevertheless, you never know exactly where they're going to end up. Coming up next, we're going to end the show with some predictions of some of the bigger games happening over the next couple of days, so stay with us.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how the Boston Celtics, in shocking fashion, gave up a game to the Brooklyn Nets. They were up 21 at one point. They were up 17 to start the fourth quarter. They gave up 51 total points to the Brooklyn Nets in the fourth quarter, and Karis LeVert carried them in overtime, scored all 11 points for the Brooklyn Nets, whereas the Celtics only managed 2 points. And Karis LeVert had a career-high 51-point outing to carry the Nets over the Celtics in dramatic fashion on their home court. So it's an unfortunate loss for the Boston Celtics, really. But at the end of the day, they only have themselves to blame because that was just a poor effort of trying to close out a game. It really was. And so the Celtics are going to have to try and turn things around. Now looking forward at some predictions over the next couple of games. On Thursday, we got the Warriors versus the Raptors, and this isn't a huge game just because of where the Warriors are at right now in the standings. But the reason why I'm putting it on this list and why I'm making a prediction on it is because it's the finals rematch. And still, you can even say, it's the finals rematch, but it's not the same. It's not even close to the same because the Warriors are not what they once were. But they are getting a piece back. They're getting Stephen Curry back in this one. It's his first game action since late October. He's been out with a broken hand, and he's finally been cleared to finally play. I mean, he'll obviously be on a minutes restriction, won't play a lot, have sporadic minutes. But I'm just really interested to see just how much of an impact he could really have. after being out for so long. I mean, he's got to be itching to play. He obviously still will have that same scoring touch because you've seen videos of it. I mean, he is a natural scorer. So it's more for me about his conditioning and how well he's going to be able to stay ready, stay fit throughout the entirety of the game. But I think it's going to add an element to this game that many people probably won't see. The Raptors are second in the East right now. The Dubs are the last in the Western Conference. The Raptors just beat the Suns to end a 3-game losing streak where they had lost to the Nuggets, the Charlotte Hornets, and the Milwaukee Bucks. So I can see them losing to the Nuggets and the Bucks. There was two of the best teams in the NBA. But losing to the Hornets kind of leaves some daylight open for the Warriors to come out and, get a win of their own. The Hornets are not better than the Golden State Warriors, especially since the Warriors have, Stephen Curry back. So this could be some daylight for them. Also, the Raptors have 3 players that are questionable in Marcus Gasol, Van Vliet, and Ibaka. So if one of these players don't play, it's not that big a deal for the Raptors. They can plug in other players and still be successful. But if all 3 of these players don't play, that opens the door up even more for the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors, on the other hand, though, might not have Draymond Green, might not have Kevon Looney. So I have to go with the Raptors. I know I was making it seem like I was going to go with the Warriors, but even though I am a Golden State Warriors fan, I got to be realistic. The Raptors will win this game. It just makes more sense. It's just way more believable, but it'll be fun. It'll be fun to see just because Stephen Curry's finally back in the NBA. He's a very exciting player to watch, and I think he'll just add an extra level of excitement to this Warriors team that's been, down in the dumps pretty much all season long. So you never know. I mean, crazier miracles have happened before. So next game I got up on this lineup are Clippers versus the Rockets. I'm going to say right off the bat, I'm going with the Los Angeles Clippers. They're on a 5-game winning streak, and the Rockets just lost to the Knicks. So they're probably hurting right now, ego-wise. They might want to bounce back and beat one of the best teams in the West, try and beat them up the Western Conference standings right now, but I just don't see that happening with how the Clippers have been playing recently. They've just been very consistent, have a full squad, healthy, finally, and they are just deeper than the Rockets are. The Rockets have more firepower. James Harden and Russell Westbrook are 2 crazy good players, but in comparison, the Clippers have great defenders. I think Patrick Beverley is going to get all up in Russell Westbrook's head, all up in his face, and just be that annoying nuisance that Patrick Beverley is on the defensive end. And Russell Westbrook's going to totally bite into that play, kind of lose his mentality with it all, because I just feel like Russell Westbrook will lose his focus and lose his composure in this one. And then James Harden can't do it all by himself. He's going to have Paul George on him, who's one of the best two-way guards in the league. And then you got James Harden going in between Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. I think I like the Clippers' odds. Plus, like I said, they're just deeper. They got Kawhi Leonard, they got Paul George, they got Montrezl Harrell, they got Lou Williams, they got Marcus Morris, Reggie Jackson. I mean, you can just continue naming players. Whereas the Rockets, they do have some depth to them, but they just don't have as much as the Clippers do. So for me, I think the Clippers are going to win this one. It's going to be a great game between 2 powerhouses in the Western Conference. But at the end of the day, I think the over-under for margin of victory for the Clippers, for me, is 5, and it's going to be over 5, I think, in my opinion. The Rockets just won't have enough. I think even though the Rockets love their small ball lineup, the Clippers will be able to match up pretty well with that and be able to shut down what they've been doing for the most part, other than their game against the Knicks. The next game up I got is also on Friday. It's the Milwaukee Bucks versus the Los Angeles Lakers, which is obviously a huge game, a great game to watch. I've been waiting for this one. The Bucks won Game 1 between these two, 111-104. But that's just one sample size, so you want to see some more about this potential finals matchup. It's exciting it's exciting just thinking about it, honestly. This game is at Staples Center, so Lakers have some advantage in that sense. The Bucks also would possibly be without Kyle Korver, maybe no George Hill, so those kind of hurt a little bit, not too much because they're just like role players, but that depth does help the Bucks in a lot of ways, whereas the Lakers don't have too much depth, so that could hurt them potentially. But at the end of the day, I'm going to Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis just beat the Pacers, but before that, he only managed 13 points. There's no way that he does that twice in 1 week. He's going to go off. He's going to take this game personally. I mean, he's up against the king. He did just praise him, saying it's absolutely insane that he's still MVP-like at 35 years of age. That's his new goal, obviously. But he was going to want to take it to the king because Giannis is the best player in the league right now, and he wants to prove it on the biggest stage. And I think in this game against the Los Angeles Lakers, he's going to go off. I hope that Chris Middleton will rise to the occasion as well. I feel like in big games, he kind of seems to shy away from the spotlight just a little bit. But if those two can perform well, DiVincenzo too, playing well right now. I think that the Bucks could surprise the Lakers again and win this game in this finals matchup potentially. And so it'll be interesting to see, because if the Lakers win this game in turn to what I'm saying, then it's 1-1. So really, it really leaves a lot of questions asked about how this would look if we went to the finals, because it could go either way. But if the Bucks win this game, you can write it off now. The Milwaukee Bucks are going to be NBA champions this year. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. And then finally, lastly, number 4, Sunday, the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Los Angeles Clippers. Home game for both teams, Staples Center. Another big game. Clippers have dominated this matchup. They've won both previous matchups. The first one being 112-102, and then the second one being 111-106. They're coming off a win against Houston if my predictions are correct. So they'll be riding high. They'll be playing, at that point, they'll be on a 6-game winning streak. And the Lakers are just not as deep as the Clippers are. And I keep bringing up depth because, and at the end of the day, depth is what helps your team really succeed. That lasting effort and energy coming off your bench, whereas you have to just solely rely on your stars. I mean, LeBron and AD can't carry your team every single game, so they're going to have to look to try and go to the bench, and I feel like if you're going to do that, the Clippers can look down their bench and probably feel a little bit better about their chances. Also, this is the first battle between the Morris brothers, which I also think is pretty fun to see. We talked about it in previous podcasts that if Markieff Morris ends up at the Lakers, which he ends up doing so, that those two could live together, even like drive into the game together. So that'd be interesting to see if they arrive together for this game between the Lakers and the Clippers. But at the end of the day, I'm going the Clippers because I think it'll be really interesting to see if they win this game, make some more headway in the standings, and just put some more pressure on the Los Angeles Lakers for that 1 seed. So make them sweat a little bit about their position, not be as comfortable as they've been pretty much all season long. So those are the best games coming up in the next couple of days. I recommend watching every single one of them because they're going to be fun to watch. Probably some of the biggest games of the year happening in just 1 week span. So it'll be fun to watch. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice review because that really helps us out. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I would really appreciate that. I'm Isiah Quiroz. Thank you all. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.